While the original Street Fighter was a moderate success in Japan, it became a big hit in the US. After finding success with Final Fight and failure with other offshoots, Capcom USA decided they wanted to have a true Street Fighter sequel that would be an evolution of the fighting game. The game would be designed by Akira Nishitani and Akira Yasuda. Music for the game was composed by Yoko Shimomura and Isao Abe. The game was released in arcades in 1991 entitled Street Fighter II: The World Warrior. The game built upon many of the conventions established in the first game, as well as introduced dramatic changes. Special moves were no longer as devastating or powerful as they once were. Instead, they were much easier to pull off and more forgiving. Street Fighter II offered the player a selection of multiple characters, each with their own unique fighting styles and special moves. This allowed for players to create combinations of their characters' basic and special moves. Even so, the designers of the game made sure the game's mechanics were fine-tuned to be as balanced as possible while providing the right amount of fun. Ken and Ryu returned in the sequel's roster with expanded though similar move sets. They were joined by 6 other unique fighters representing many different countries around the world. There was E Honda, the sumo wrestler from Japan, Chung Li, a Chinese martial artist from China, Blanca, a beastman from Brazil, Zangief, a pro wrestler from the USSR, Guile, an American soldier from the USA, and Dalsim, a yoga master from India. Just like in the original, the game featured numerous bonus stages that occurred between matches. After defeating the other 7 fighters, the player would face 4 computer-controlled boss characters known as the 4 Devas. One of the 4 was the final boss from the first Street Fighter, Sagat, who now sported a scar on his chest which he got from Ryu. One of the other bosses was an American boxer named M. Bison. He was meant to be an interpretation of the famous boxer Mike Tyson, but due to a risk of copyright infringement in America, Capcom decided to rotate his name with the other bosses. He would now be known as Balrog. The other fighter was Vega, a masked cage fighter from Spain. The final boss, known as M. Bison in America, was a mysterious but powerful military commander. The game's single-player campaign offered something new in fighting games by providing a story for each of the characters regarding their involvement with the tournament. Once M. Bison was defeated, players would witness the outcome that happened for their characters. These endings would present the players with the characters' lives outside of the tournament, such as Ken getting married to his longtime girlfriend Elizabeth, Chung-Li avenging her father's death, and Zangief dancing with the Soviet Union President Mikhail Gorbachev. Street Fighter II was a massive success for Capcom and started the fighting game boom in the 1990s. The game was soon ported to the Super Nintendo by the middle of 1992, and eventually to every other possible game system available. The game became adored by fans and critics worldwide and would lead to all kinds of merchandising for Capcom. It wasn't long until fans became eager to learn of what Capcom would have in store for the game's inevitable sequel. Instead of a sequel, what they got was a long line of updates for their beloved fighting game. Street Fighter II Champion Edition arrived in 1992 and offered further fine-tuning to the fighting mechanics and better balancing among the characters. Players could now play as the 4 boss characters as well as the same characters in Versus mode. Other updates included redrawn character portraits, recolored backgrounds, and an alternate color scheme for each character. Several bugs that were discovered by players were fixed as well. With the massive popularity of Street Fighter II, it wouldn't be long until people would find ways to modify the arcade machines to have at their own settings. This was the beginning of the unofficial Street Fighter II Rainbow Edition. This unauthorized update added new features that could easily be abused. Players could change characters during a match. More characters could suddenly fire projectile weapons, but they had strange characteristics like a slow speed or homing ability. Air throws could be performed on players that were on the ground. Special moves can now be executed in mid-air. Some players would also have faster than usual moving speeds. While it was fun to play against the computer-controlled opponents since they weren't designed to handle these new changes, it became incredibly unfair when playing against a human opponent. In response to the arcade mods like Rainbow Edition, Capcom released another update called Street Fighter II Hyper Fighting at the end of 1992. This update sped up the gameplay, added mid-air moves, and had more gameplay tweaks. Some of the characters received new moves like Chung-Li's Fireball attack and Dalsim's Yoga teleport. Some of the graphics were redone again, as well as the color schemes for characters and stages. By 1993, Capcom released the second Street Fighter game that combined Champion Edition and Hyper Fighting. The game was released as Street Fighter II Turbo on the Super Nintendo and Street Fighter II Special Champion Edition on the Sega Genesis. To build up more hype for its release, Capcom released a now infamous promotional video to a select group of gamers.
Hey, you've been specially chosen to receive some really important advanced news. Not only are you going to get a sneak preview, but you'll be getting strategies, tips and techniques, and some of the coolest new moves in Street Fighter 2 Turbo. And because Capcom has only sent this tape to a chosen few, counting on you to show your friends and spread the word.
The game was eventually ported to numerous other systems and brought online on the Xbox 360 in 2006. After 2 updates to Street Fighter 2, fans weren't the only ones wondering when Capcom would release a true sequel. Many of the programmers and artists assumed that after the release of Street Fighter 2 Turbo, they would move on to Street Fighter 3. So they began sketching out ideas for characters that were meant to replace the original cast. They had begun designing concepts for 4 new characters and a new main boss. However, the arcade scene soon faced a new phenomenon in 1992 with the release of Midway's Mortal Kombat. The game featured live-action performers using digitized graphics instead of sprite-based animations and brought with it an excess of blood and gore. At the end of a match, the player could perform a fatality to finish off their opponents. This created an outcry among parents and politicians, which led to the game's controversy. Of course, with this controversy, it made the game that much more popular among teenagers who wanted to get their hands on it. What was originally a quick project became a goldmine for Midway, who soon began development on a sequel. Fearing they would fall behind Mortal Kombat, Capcom decided to rush out another upgrade to Street Fighter 2 immediately. Feeling pressured, half of the Street Fighter 2 team left Capcom and were hired by SNK. The team that left would go on to develop the fighting game series Samurai Spirits, known as Samurai Showdown in the US. The remaining team stayed behind to release what would come to be known as Super Street Fighter 2 in October 1993.